This clip is sponsored by American Mobile. If you're a nurse interested in traveling, visit americanmobile.com to get started.
What you think constitutes a good death, or maybe an empowering death? What we were just talking about made me think of my own personal story. And so I'm happy to share my own personal story with my grandfather. I know that you have a similar story where you're involved, in your family's death as well. But my grandfather passed this summer in August. And I think because I had seen so many circumstances where deaths had gone not wrong, but control was taken away from, they in the hospital. A lot of times the patient doesn't have control over how things go, and I think because I had that background of seeing so much death in the ICU, I think I was able to have a conversation with him about what he really wants at the end of his life. And he had stage 4 head and neck throat cancer that he didn't tell anybody about. He knew about it, but he knew that he didn't want any interventions done. And so we found out when we saw him, I think we saw him in November, and then in May he had lost like 40 pounds, and we were all kind of like, oh, what's going on? And, then he had a couple scans and found, he had stage 4 cancer, but he didn't want to go through any of the treatments. He saw my grandmother go through that, and, he didn't want any of that. And he really wanted to, he was a snowbird. He lived up in New York, and then he also had a house in Florida. So he was in upstate New York when he was getting really weak, and he really wanted to make it down to Florida. That was his goal. That was like the most important thing to him, was to make it down to Florida, which my grandmother passed in Florida in that house. So I'm like wondering if maybe that was just a connection that he wanted to have down there. And we were at a point where he was trying to get my brother to drive him down to Florida. And I'm thinking my ICU brain, and was like, okay, he's not eating. He's like dehydrated. He's been to the ER a couple times. He needed fluids. Like he might go into kidney failure. This is like not a good situation where my non-medical younger brother is going to take him 18 hours down to Florida. This is not something that nobody wants this. But I did have a, conversation with him about, he was very rigid about it. He was like, oh, buddy will take me. And so, but I sat down and I talked to him about, we're all on the same page about what you want. We all want to make this happen for you, to get you down to Florida. We just need to do it in the safest way possible with the most resources, and I think that that just kind of frankness, I think, with him, but also like the compassion to like understand, like we're all in this for you. This is how we want you to see the end of your life. So, we can ultimately, we ended up doing like a medic van. A medic van took him all the way down from New York to Florida. And then he passed the next day once he was in Florida. He was, he was so ready to go. And I'm really proud of the way that went, even though it was really hard for everybody involved. But my aunts and uncles, the way that we were able to get together and coordinate that, for a common goal of giving him what he wanted at the end of his life. I have no regrets about that death. Like I have no, you know, he didn't go to the hospital. He didn't, you know, have, and I think so often, especially if you don't have that background, you know, it seems like there's no other choice but to just kind of prolong the inevitable and then go to the hospital and, you know, pass that way.
Yeah.
So I think about, you know, the ways that you help families and patients kind of facilitate those conversations. And like, you know, a couple of those things just made me think, like, how can we, what constitutes a good death? You know, like how do we empower patients and families to have a death that they can look back and be like, you know, this is what they wanted, and, you know, I'm fine with it. I'm not going to carry this with me.
Yeah, I love this question. And I think that your story is such a beautiful example of how I would define a good death, which is really, it highlights the importance of us being in consent with the situation. And so your grandfather was able to communicate to you all, for me to be in consent with my death, I need to be in Florida. And you all were able to say, okay, like we respect that. And for us to be in consent with your terms of being in consent, we need that to happen in a somewhat safe and controlled way, so that we know that no one of us is going to be, you know, stuck in a situation that we're not able to handle on our own. And so you had the right fit of support. You had the medical van, and he had the support of his family. And, you know, I hear stories like this. And I've witnessed stories like this so often, where a person gets right into that place or that position, or, you know, the right people are present or the right people are absent, and then they're just able to go with ease. And so my sense is that consent is a huge part of having a good death. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be this like very idealistic experience. It doesn't have to be like, you know, I was, you know, in a forest and I was surrounded by all of my loved ones and the birds were singing, though that would be totally magical. And I think I would be in consent with that. But yeah, even just like those little experiences of consent along the way are being honored.
Yeah.
And that can happen in the hospital. That can happen in long-term care.